Carmel Cipollone.
Mr Speaker, I haven't had the privilege of being on the Health Select Committee and actually deliberating over this bill, but I'm really happy to have the opportunity to speak to the Home and Community Support Payment for Travel Between Clients Settlement Bill. And firstly, I just want to say, Mr Speaker, that Labor is pleased to see the settlement of this case finally brought before the House after the Human Rights Commission ruling travel time should be remunerated several years ago. And I just want to reiterate what Kevin Haig has said in terms of the acknowledgement for Winnie Laban and I think Catherine Delahunty that actually hosted a meeting maybe 6 years ago, where these issues were being discussed. I think it is good that we have an understanding, a shared understanding and shared support for this bill in the House, but I do need to highlight, Mr Speaker, that National has reluctantly bowed to pressure from unions and adopted Labor's fair and sensible policy to pay home support workers for the time they spend travelling between clients. That's a fact. Unfortunately, it did take some convincing. We're glad that National finally got there, but it's unfortunate that they couldn't see sense with respect to this issue right from the start. Jonathan Naylor, that's indeed what happened. We do give credit, Mr Speaker, to Jenny Goodman and the PSA who bravely took a test case claim on behalf of hundreds of fellow home care workers. Mr Speaker, even with this progress, the settlement is still a long way from dealing with the historic underpayment of home and community support workers. Many of these people are on wages close to the minimum wage and, given the work they do, deserve to be on a pay grade similar to nurses, Mr Speaker. And I think we need to acknowledge that this is a growing workforce. We have an ageing population in this country, so the demand for carers and home support is only going to increase. So we can't continue to ignore the fact that we have a workforce here that is underpaid, that needs to have further investment, Mr Speaker. And I'm sure all of us, as we get to the point where we require this type of care, want to know that we're getting the best care possible, and want to know, Mr Speaker, that when we're getting the best care possible, that the people taking the time to look after us are in fact being looked after. Mr Speaker, that workforce that we're talking about, I think we need to acknowledge, is a highly feminised workforce. And before I came into Parliament, I had the opportunity to manage a research project which was about the non-regulated Pacific health workforce, and many of those that we were doing the research on actually fell into this category of home and community support, Mr Speaker. And again, just to reiterate, many of them were women. The biggest, one of the biggest issues that we had was that it was an underpaid workforce, but one of the things that stood out was that when surveyed, the workers in that workforce highlighted the fact that they weren't just in it for the fact that it was a job, but because they actually cared, they enjoyed their work, and it was the work that they chose to undertake. So I think we need to acknowledge that and really look at ways in which we can increase the remuneration for that workforce moving forward. Mr Speaker, the wider funding of the home support services also needs to be addressed, as home support remains the only service not planned and funded on a national basis. The lack of funding pushes down wages in the sector. The lack of funding also means, as the Home and Community Health Association has stated, home and community support will increasingly become an option only for those who can afford it. And many people in the last year have found their home support levies cut. This is dangerous, Mr Speaker, and I think we need to acknowledge it. If people require support but don't have the funding to pay for it, and then they're left in their homes to try and battle their way through everyday tasks, then actually we're putting them at risk. And the cost down the track in terms of the health care that will be required if they have accidents because of the fact that they were not in a position to be able to undertake all the tasks that they were doing is actually going to be far more than what it would have cost to provide the few hours of care that they may have needed. Mr Speaker, this government has cut $1.6 billion out of the health system over 6 years, and the workforce is bearing the brunt of this gross underfunding stretched to capacity. There are still issues with this new settlement. New organisations who join up will not be covered by this deal. So there are things that need to be ironed out, Mr Speaker, but as I said before, I express Labour's support for this bill. It's just an area that we need to continue to work together on in this House to ensure that, that we're looking after this workforce.
The member's time has expired.